Estate's party was voting against the existence of the National Assembly. In 2005, they had a manifesto option of abolishing the Assembly. Can he understand why many of us on this side of the House do not believe that he truly wants to involve our National Assembly of Wales in terms of the governance of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund?
Mr. Speaker, I think that question is a bit rich coming from the Honourable Lady. When her party in government left us with the famous legislative consent order motions, where the Welsh Government couldn't even pass primary legislation without Parliament's explicit control in certain areas. I would point to the Wales Act and to the referenda, which have extended the powers of the Welsh Assembly, and also the countless joint ministerial committees that we've held, as well as this afternoon's meeting between the Prime Minister and the First Minister to discuss how best to manage Brexit.
Ruth George.
Question number 3.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will answer question 3 and 5 together. Universal credit is available in every job centre in Wales. Our welfare reforms are incentivising work and supporting working families, and employment in Wales, as my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, has just mentioned, is at a record high.
Ruth George.
Thank you. 26% of people in Wales have a disability and 39% of them are in poverty, both the highest proportion in the UK. So what assessment has the Minister made of the number losing severe disability premium when they transfer onto universal credit, and the impact on those individuals, their families and their communities?
Well, as we have seen in recent weeks, there is assessment being made by the DWP. The Secretary of State has made it clear it's vital that we reform to deliver a fair and a compassionate welfare system. This is an ongoing piece of work, and it's absolutely essential that people that have been trapped out of work with a confusing and complex mix of tax credits and benefits are helped into work.
Nick Thomas-Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many organisations in my constituency do great work mitigating the effects of the universal credit rollout, but it's still causing great hardships. Have ministers actually asked the Prime Minister to fully stop the rollout, or are they simply just not standing up for Wales?
As my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, is fully committed to not rushing the migration of universal credit, and she will proceed with the utmost care and attention. Managed migration, as she has announced, will be piloted this year with 10,000 people, following which the government will report on its findings. And that migration beyond the pilot number will not occur until my right honourable friend has brought legislation back to this House to extend that migration.
Evan Foster.
Question number 4, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The removal of the tolls from the Severn River crossings will drive the biggest economic stimulus Wales has seen in decades, putting over £1,400 a year back into the pockets of hard-working motorists and boosting the South Wales economy alone by £100 million.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted to hear the positive assessment from my right honourable friend of the impact removing the tolls, which at a significant cost to doing business between the southwest of England and Wales, is having. Can he advise what discussions he is having to exploit this opportunity by identifying any job-creating development this might inspire on the M4-M5 corridor?
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I pay tribute to my honourable friend for his work in this area to not only encourage closer working between this super region that is being developed. The Great Western Powerhouse allows the southwest of England and South Wales to market itself jointly to start competing with the Northern Powerhouse and the Midlands engine, and I know that he has a strong interest in the M5 and the business around that, and I obviously have a strong interest in the M4, and together we will attract more investment.
I begin by associating myself with the comments the Secretary of State has made about Stephen Lewis. As his local MP, I always admired him and respected him, and his passion for Wales will be greatly missed within the Assembly. It's a loss to Welsh political life. The closing of the tolls at the M4 bridge creates massive opportunities. What discussions has he had with other government departments to bring regional offices and government jobs to Wales?
I'm grateful to the honourable member for such a question, and there are a number of discussions going across government departments about the drive to decentralise civil service opportunities from London. The honourable member will be aware of the Cardiff hub, and we are looking what other opportunities exist. But abolishing the 7 tolls has also created challenges, and we need better integration for projects such as the Chepstow bypass and other road projects that work cross-border, and we need to harness the priority of those.
Mark Tammy.
Number 7, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Welsh economy has shown significant progress in recent years. The rate of employment in Wales is at a record high, increasing by more than any other part of the UK over the last year, with 64,000 more people in work. There is a wealth of world-leading innovation in Wales, with Welsh businesses spending over £450 million on R&D in 2017.
Mark Tammy.
The decision on Wilver Newydd is a massive setback, not only for Anglesey, but for the whole North Wales economy, and was a central plank of the North Wales growth deal. Now, when it comes to major infrastructure projects, the Secretary of State does have a record of unmitigated failure. He has a kind of reverse Midas touch. And when will he start to speak up for Wales in Cabinet? And if he isn't prepared to speak up for Wales, will he step aside and let someone else have a go?
Well, I can tell the right honourable gentleman there is no greater champion for Wales than my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, but he raises a very serious and important point regarding Wilver. It does affect the whole of the region. We were, as a government, willing to offer a significant and generous package of potential support, but despite this, Hitachi have decided that the project was still too great a commercial challenge. We are still committed to nuclear sites as part of the UK's future energy mix, and we will also continue to support the Isle of Anglesey with initiatives such as the North Wales Growth Deal.
Given the economic uncertainty now surrounding Hitachi's future at Wilver Newydd, I understand from my colleague Rhyn ap Iorwerth AM that Welsh Government indicates they are prepared to commit further funds to the North Wales growth bid if Westminster makes the same commitment too. Will he?
The Honourable Lady makes a very, very important point. We are certainly open-minded. Any commitments such as this must be project-led. And we do, again, I'll reiterate, recognise the significant impact that Hitachi's decision will have on the region and planned investments, which some of them could be codependent deal. We are committing £120 million, as the Honourable Lady knows, and we will certainly be talking to our partners in Wales. In fact, I'm going there next week to talk with ministers and stakeholders.
I greatly appreciate that the Minister sees the importance of the North Wales growth bid, and that in relation to the news of Wilver. It is interesting that the British government offered Hitachi a 1/3 equity stake in the 20 billion nuclear power development in Ynys-Môn. Now that Wilver Newydd looks set to be the latest project to join the Welsh infrastructure scrapyard, will the Minister guarantee that his government will use the previously promised equity to create 850 alternative, permanent and well-paid jobs in North West Wales?
She raises an important point. We're certainly not abandoning that area of Wales. As I'll reiterate again, this was a commercial decision. We are committed to £120 million in the North Wales growth deal. We hope to get that over the line as soon as practically possible. I think the decision by the government to agree to take an equity stake, to secure a strike price, and also to underwrite the debt on that project was an incredibly generous offer.
That's helpful.
Chris Rain. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, since 2013, we've seen the cancellation of the Atlantic Array wind turbines off South Wales, the cancellation of the Celtic Array wind farms off North Wales, the cancellation of the Cardiff-Swansea rail line in 2018, the cancellation of Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon 2018, and to cap it all, the cancellation of cancellations, the cancellation of Wilver Newydd last week, a £16 billion investment that will have transformed the economy of North Wales. Will the Secretary of State support the establishment of an inquiry, as the CBI has called for in Wales, to uncover why this Conservative government are incapable of delivering large infrastructure projects in Wales?
Well, what the honourable gentleman seems to miss is the fact that these are commercial decisions, that these projects are being put on hold. In terms of Hitachi, this is a suspended project. We'll continue to engage with Hitachi regarding options for the site. We're absolutely committed, Mr. Speaker, to creating a broad-based, resilient economy through our industrial strategy, and we'll continue to work with the private sector, local partners and the Welsh Government to ensure Wales prospers. But I would hope that honourable members and right honourable members across the House will welcome the fact that we have figures this week where we have seen the employment rate in Wales now matches that of the UK for the first time since my honourable friend, the member for Wokingham, was the Secretary of State for Wales.
Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government recognises that transport is a major cost for households and businesses, so it was announced at last year's budget that fuel duty across the UK will remain frozen for the 9th successive year.
Robert Halfon.
Thank you, sir. Despite the excellent fuel duty freeze from the government, oil companies are still hitting Welsh motorists and UK motorists across the UK by increasing oil prices, petrol prices hugely when the international oil price goes up, yet taking a long time to reduce it when the oil price goes down. Will my honourable friend work with the Secretary of State for Transport and the Treasury to introduce a pump watch regulator recommended by Fairfuel UK to have fair prices for motorists at the pumps?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's no greater champion for consumers than my honourable friend, the member for Harlow, but we don't believe that setting up a new regulator would be justified given the costs of doing so. Now, like every other sector, it's subject to the normal competition and consumer protection law, but we are committed to passing on savings to commuters, and due to 9 years of fuel duty freezes, by April 2020, the average car driver across Wales and the UK will have saved a cumulative £1,000.
Do that.
Ern Smith. Did the Minister confirm that 30,000 low-income families in Wales will lose £2,500 a year as a result of the imposition of the two-child policy? Does he think that is fair?
Well, what I would say to my honourable friend is that the Secretary of State Work and Pensions has announced she will not be extending the two-child limits on universal credit for children born before April 2017, when the policy first came into effect. This will benefit around 15,000 families, and the decision restores the original intent of the policy, which will give parents in receipt of universal credit the same choices as those in work.
Maureen! Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I just associate myself with the Minister's comments on number 10? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we leave the European Union, our economy is growing faster than the Eurozone. Employment is at record high levels, and economic activity in Wales at the highest level since records began.
Alan McMurray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I just associate myself with the Minister's comments on Steffan Lewis? He was one of the most able and talented politicians Wales has ever had. With days to go until we crash out with a no deal, we know the devastating impact. The CBI are warning us. The army is on standby to slaughter lambs set for export, and the government is refusing to rule out a no deal. What does he say to this, given the PM is not going to get her deal through?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister said, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, set out position that she is determined to work not only on our side of the House but across the House in order to bring forward proposals that will allow the House of Commons to support a deal. But I will say, Mr. Speaker, it's interesting that the Welsh First Minister, Mark Drakeford, is prepared to meet my right honourable friend to discuss the proposals, but the right honourable member, the Leader of the Opposition, refuses to do so in spite of being more than happy to meet the IRA on other occasions.
Calling the right honourable member for Cannon Valley, in spite of the constraints of time, I know that she will ask a commendably brief question.
Mr. Speaker. I'm very concerned. Number 11.
Number 11. Number 11. Just 11.
I'm very concerned.
Number 12. Yes. 12. Just number 12.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Right Honourable member for raising this very important issue, and my thoughts are with all those families affected. I also recognise the Right Honourable Lady's continued and passionate dedication to this issue and to ensure that we have a health service that is fit for everyone. It's imperative that both the internal and external reviews of maternity services in Cumtaff are both comprehensive and timely. Those affected will quite rightly be looking for urgent answers and clear actions to ensure improvements in patient care and safety.
Thank you. I'm grateful for that answer. Will the Secretary of State continue to monitor the investigation and report back to this House the findings?
Of course, Mr. Speaker, at present this is a matter for the Welsh Government and for the Health Board, but we will await the findings of this review and we will act accordingly. In the meantime, the Government will continue to ensure the NHS has the funding it requires, and I can assure her that we'll work with her to ensure we get the right outcomes.
Thank you. Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Stephen Kerr.
Yeah. Question number 1, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure members across the House will wish to join me in marking Holocaust Memorial Day this Sunday. It is an opportunity for us to remember all those who suffered in the Holocaust and in subsequent genocides around the world. And it is a reminder that we must all challenge and condemn prejudice and hatred wherever it is found. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Stephen Kerr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I associate myself with the comments the Prime Minister just made in relation to Holocaust Memorial Day. May I also say, as a proud Scot, that the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is the most successful political union that the world has ever known. That said, does the Prime Minister agree with me that when Nicola Sturgeon demands a second independence referendum, only 4 years after we had the last one, that the UK government should side with the majority of the people of Scotland and firmly tell her no?
Can I say, my honourable friend is absolutely right. As he points out, Scotland held a referendum in 2014. It was legal, it was fair, it was decisive, and the people clearly voted for Scotland to remain part of the United Kingdom. But more than that, at the last general election, the people of Scotland again sent a very clear message that they do not want a second divisive referendum. But the SNP, sadly, are out of touch with the people of Scotland. They haven't yet heard that message. The last thing we want is a second independence referendum. The United Kingdom should be pulling together, not being driven apart.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sunday is Holocaust Memorial Day, a time for us all to reflect on the horrors of genocide and to recommit to never again to allow the poison of anti-Semitism and racism to disfigure our society in any way. And the Prime Minister was also right to acknowledge the other genocides that have happened since the Second World War. It's up to us to try to prevent such horrors ever happening again anywhere in the world. Mr. Speaker, after the overwhelming defeat of her deal, the Prime Minister says she wants solutions to the Brexit crisis that command sufficient support in the House. The Chancellor and the Business Secretary agree, and I quote, there is a large majority in the Commons opposed to no deal. So will the Prime Minister listen to her own Cabinet members and take no deal off the table?
What I, members of the Cabinet and the whole Government are doing is working to ensure that we leave the European Union with a deal. And that is the way to avoid no deal, to leave the European Union with a deal. But I say to the right honourable gentleman, that what I have been wanting to do, and have been doing with members across this House, is sit down and talk about how we can secure support in this House for a deal. The Right Honourable Gentleman has been willing to sit down with Hamas, Hezbollah and the IRA without preconditions, yet he won't meet me to talk about Brexit. In this case, he's neither present nor involved.
Mr. Speaker, actually, I did reach out to the Prime Minister last September when I offered to discuss our deals with her. And it appears, Mr. Speaker, that while the door to her office may well be opened, apparently the minds inside it are completely closed. She has shown no flexibility whatsoever in taking no deal off the table. The Chancellor reassured business that amendments would be put down that would have the effect of removing the threat of no deal, which is binding and effective. Given that those amendments are now tabled, will the Prime Minister confirm that, if passed, they would rule out no deal?
The Right Honourable Gentleman, what we have seen is amendments seeking to engineer a situation where Article 50 is extended. Now, that does not solve the issue. There will always be a point of decision, and the decision remains the same. No deal, a deal, or no Brexit. I'm delivering on Brexit. I want to do it with a deal. Why won't he come and meet me and talk about it?
The only consistency in her strategy seems to be running down the clock on this by threatening no deal as an alternative to her dead deal. The CBI, Mr. Speaker, says the projected impact of no deal on the UK economy would be devastating. Leaving with no deal would be a hammer blow to manufacturing industry in this country, costing jobs and damaging living standards. Last week, the Justice Secretary was asked if he ruled out a customs union. He said, "I don't think we can." However, the same day, the Leader of the House said that we cannot be in a customs union. Can the Prime Minister be clear? Does her government rule out a customs union with the European Union?
The Right Honourable Gentleman talks about a customs union, and I note that he's put an amendment down which refers to, well, the Labour Party used to refer to a comprehensive customs union, then it was a new customs union, now it's a permanent customs union. But the question, I'm happy to sit down and talk to him about what he means by that. Does he mean accepting the common external tariff? Does he mean accepting the common commercial policy? Does he mean accepting the Union Customs Code? Does he mean accepting EU state aid rules? If he won't talk about it, there's only one conclusion. He hasn't got a clue.
Mr. Speaker, my question was, does the Prime Minister rule in or rule out a customs union? It's not complicated. She could have said yes, she could have said no. Mr. Speaker, it's a key part of what Labour is putting forward, and it's backed by the TUC, representing millions of workers, by the CBI, representing thousands of businesses. It's backed by the First Ministers of Wales and Scotland, and indeed by many members of her own party, including apparently her own Chief of Staff. So can the Prime Minister explain why is she ruling out a customs union as a solution to the crisis? She could, for once, actually answer the question.
Perhaps I can try to help the Right Honourable Gentleman here, because I think when many people talk about a customs union, what they want to ensure is that businesses can export to the EU without facing tariffs, quotas or rules of origin checks. Now, I agree, and the deal we negotiated delivers just that. But it also allows us to have an independent trade policy and do our own trade deals with the rest of the world. The benefits of a customs union and the benefits of our own trade policy.
Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, the International Trade Secretary promised 40 trade agreements, the second after Brexit. And this morning, he couldn't name a single one. His own business minister said he was not impressed by sham trade agreements and not prepared to sell business down the river for other people's political dogma. So why is the Prime Minister prepared to sell people's jobs and living standards down the river rather than negotiate a customs union that would be part of a sensible deal for the future?
The deal that we negotiated did protect jobs, and it was rejected by this House. There are some specific issues. There are some specific issues that members across this House have raised in relation to that deal, and we work on those. We've already responded on a number of issues, on parliamentary involvement, on workers' rights, on citizens' rights, as a result of the conversations that we've had with members of this House. But what we want to ensure is that we get a deal that does protect jobs. But the right honourable gentleman is doing exactly what he always does. He just stands up, uses these phrases, and the honest answer is I don't think he knows what those phrases mean and what the implications of those phrases are. We will be protecting jobs in the UK with a good trade relationship with the European Union and enhancing and increasing jobs in the UK. And by the way, I see the right honourable gentleman hasn't referred to the employment figures this week, where we see employment up in this country as a result of this government.
Mr. Speaker, what the Prime Minister clearly didn't have time to mention was the rising levels of in-work poverty, personal debt and the problems people face in surviving at work. Mr. Speaker, the door of office might be open, but the minds are closed and the Prime Minister is clearly not listening. Mr. Speaker.
Order. People making an extraordinary noise from a sedentary position haven't got the slightest prospect of being called to ask a question unless they're on the paper. If they realise that and recognise their own folly. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Across the country, people are worried about public services, their living standards and rising levels of personal debt. While a third of her government are at the Billionaires' Jamboree in Davos, she says she's listening, but rules out changes on the two issues where there might be a majority, against no deal and for a customs union, part of Labour's sensible Brexit alternative. If the Prime Minister is serious about finding a solution, which of her red lines is she prepared to abandon? Could she name a single one?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, he makes claims about mines being closed, he asks about red lines, why doesn't he just come and talk about it? And he talks about people up and down this country. He talks about people up and down this country and what they're seeing. Well, let me tell him what we've just seen this week. Borrowing this year at its lowest level for 16 years. The IMF saying that we'll grow faster than Germany, Italy and Japan this year. UN figures showing foreign direct investment in the UK up last year. Employment rate up, number of people in work up, wages up. And the biggest threat to all of that would be a Labour government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. North Warwickshire and Bedworth voted overwhelmingly to leave the EU in 2016, and from the many conversations I've had with constituents since then, if they were asked again, I'm in absolutely no doubt they would vote the same way again. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that there's no credibility at all for a second referendum, and actually what our constituents want to see is this Parliament doing what it promised it would by honouring the referendum result, which, as the benches opposite seem to have forgotten, was to leave the EU.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. And not just he and I and all members of the Conservative Party here in this House, but members of the Labour Party in this House stood on a manifesto to respect the result of the referendum and to leave the European Union. I've set out on a number of occasions my concern about returning to the British people in a second referendum. I think people gave that clear message. We asked them to make the choice, they made the choice, and we should deliver on it.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join with the Prime Minister in marking Holocaust Memorial Day? It is important that we reflect on the inhumanity of man to man that took place both at that time and, of course, subsequently, most recently with the Rohingya people. More has to be done to eradicate the risk that peoples throughout the world suffer from genocide.
Well said, Ian.
Mr. Speaker, last November the government published an economic analysis of Brexit. It looked at 4 scenarios, but it didn't include the Prime Minister's deal. Can I ask the Prime Minister, has she done an economic analysis of her deal?
If the right honourable gentleman obviously looked carefully at the economic analysis, and he will have seen that in that economic analysis we did look at the impact of different issues in relation to the trade relation and set that out very clearly. And what it made absolutely clear was that the deal, the proposal that the government had put on the table was the one that was best in terms of delivering on the referendum and ensuring that we were maintaining people's jobs and enhancing the economy.
Ian Blackford. I can only take it from that answer, Mr. Speaker, that there is no analysis on the government's plan. And when we reflect on the paper that came out last November, Brexit will lead to a loss of up to 9% of GDP throughout the United Kingdom, costing jobs. Mr. Speaker, it is the height of irresponsibility for the Prime Minister to bring a deal to this Parliament, and we haven't seen the economic impact. People up and down the United Kingdom are going to lose their jobs, are going to lose economic opportunity because of the ideology of this government. It is important that this House stands up and reflects on this and reflects on the economic security of our citizens. We have to be honest with people. We need to go back to the people and have a people's vote and let them determine what they want to do.
We have been reflecting on the economic security of our citizens across the whole of the United Kingdom, and that is why we put forward proposals, the proposals that we did as a government last summer. It is why you see in the proposals in the deal that we negotiated with the European Union in the political declaration that ambitious trade deal for the future. But if the right honourable gentleman wants to reflect on the interests of citizens, and in the interests of the citizens of Scotland, he should reflect on the fact that being part of the United Kingdom is worth, and it's no good. The right honourable gentleman says he wants to know the figures and the economic analysis, and it's no good in them dismissing the figures and the economic analysis that show that being part of the United Kingdom is worth £10 billion in additional public spending, worth nearly £1,900 for every single person in Scotland. If he's interested in economics, stay in the United Kingdom and stop your policy of independence.
Mr. Speaker, I can tell the Prime Minister that the people of Romford remain rock solid for leaving the European Union on the 29th of March. They don't want an extension of Article 50. They don't want another referendum. They want out. Yes. Deal or no deal. Will the Prime Minister assure the House that she will deliver on the biggest vote of the British people in history, come what may?
Can I say to my honourable friend, he's absolutely right, that what we see is, in relation to this date, is actually, this is not just an arbitrary date. It was a date that effectively this House agreed to when it triggered Article 50, because it agreed, understood in that Article 50 process that there was a 2-year process, and that ends on the 29th of March 2019, as I said in response to the right honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition. Extending Article 50, I don't believe, resolves any issues, because at some point, members of this House have to decide whether they want to have a no-deal situation, agree a deal, or have no Brexit.
Andrew Hendry.
My constituent, Dennis Omondi, is a British citizen. He has uncontested custody of his young daughter Anne, who is in Kenya. Despite visiting her as often as he can, she has been denied a visa because the Home Office claim he hasn't spent enough time with her. The problem is, Prime Minister, Dennis is a serving soldier in the British Army. He's stationed at Fort George and has served tours in Afghanistan, Iraq and Cyprus at the behest of the UK government. Does the Prime Minister believe this situation is fair?
And will she look into how to reunite this loyal soldier and loving father with his daughter?
Can I first of all thank Dennis for his commitment to the serving in our armed forces. All our armed forces do an incredibly important and brave job for us. I'm sure the honourable gentleman will not expect me to be able to look at the details of a case at the dispatch box on the floor of the House, but I will ask the Home Secretary to look at the case and respond to him.
Bone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, your government is stuffed full of Remainer ministers who do not want to leave the European Union. Would you replace them with colleagues from these benches who actually believe in upholding the decision of the British people to leave the European Union on the 29th of March?
I've heard some job applications in my time, but that was quite an interesting one, I say to my honourable friend. But can I just say to my honourable friend, my position and the position of this government and ministers across this government is very clear. It is our duty to deliver on the vote of the British people to leave the European Union. The two-year process ends on the 29th of March. That is the position of the government. And of course, I'm always happy to consider job applications from my honourable friend. But the basis of his application, I have to say, was not correct, because the government is committed to taking the United Kingdom out of the European Union.
Steve Reid. Britain is facing a homelessness crisis, and homelessness, like food banks and child poverty, is linked to deprivation. So how can she justify removing deprivation levels from her new council funding formula, taking money away from the weakest and the poorest in society, just so she can bail out failing Tory councils like Northamptonshire?
I say to the honourable gentleman that we look obviously very carefully at the formula that is required in order to ensure that we have that fair funding between local authorities. As he will know, there are many cases where actually some of the measures within that have been used do not properly reflect the situation on the ground. We look very carefully at this to ensure that what we're doing is ensuring fair funding between local authorities.
Gillian Keegan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To mark Holocaust Memorial Day, a Chichester choir will be coming to Parliament to perform Push, a moving opera about the life of Szymon Gronowski, who was pushed off a train by his mother to spare him from certain death at Auschwitz. His mother and sister died, but Szymon will be here to share his story, which shows us the best and worst of humanity, and at a time when anti-Semitism is rising across Europe and here in our communities. Would the Prime Minister agree it is vital that we learn the lessons of history to eradicate anti-Semitism, and if possible, join us at the performance in Speaker's House next Monday?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for raising this important issue and highlighting that case, which I think shows the horrors that so many people went through during the Holocaust. Can I say to her that we obviously welcome the Chichester Choir to Parliament, performing Push, as she says in the House today, and I'd like to commend them for their work in keeping alive this remarkable story of Szymon Gronowski. But, as I've just indicated, his story reminds us of the millions who were killed in the concentration camps, the absolute horror of the Holocaust. As I said, we should all remember that, and remember genocides that have sadly occurred since, and condemn hatred and prejudice in all its forms, including anti-Semitism wherever it's found. And there's no place for racial hatred in our society. I apologise because I suspect I may not be able to attend the performance that my honourable friend has referred to, but I hope she will pass on my thanks to the choir for coming here and for the work that they're doing.
Sarah Jones.
The Prime Minister promised after the Grenfell Tower fire that she would do whatever it takes to keep our people safe. Today, 19 months on, the vast majority, 85% of the hundreds of blocks draped in exactly the same highly flammable cladding are still covered. The Shergard fire in Croydon shows that Grenfell is just the tip of the iceberg. Thousands of council and private buildings across the country don't have sprinklers, despite the fire services saying they are essential. Mr. Speaker, the government doesn't even collect data on the number of fires in tower blocks. As the Prime Minister wastes billions on her no-deal gamble, there is a stench of complacency about these things that matter too. Mr. Speaker, when will the Prime Minister be able to tell this country that she has honoured her promise?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady that obviously making sure that people are safe and feel safe is a very important for all of us, that they are able to feel and be safe in their homes. And I understand residents' concerns over this issue of cladding. We fully expect building owners in the private sector to take action and make sure that appropriate safety measures are in place. And make sure those safety measures are in place. Interim measures are in place when necessary on all of the 171 high-rise private residential buildings with the unsafe ACM cladding. But permanent remediation is rightly the focus, and we've repeatedly called on private building owners not to pass costs on to leaseholders. As a result of our interventions, 212 owners have either started, completed, or have commitments in place to remediate. There are 56 owners that are refusing to remediate. We're maintaining pressure on this, but we rule nothing out.
Mr. Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Non-surgical cosmetic treatments is an industry with no proper regulation. My constituent, Rachel Napier, suffered a terrible injury after a Botox filler was administered incorrectly. Will the Prime Minister assure me and this House that her government will look into appropriate regulation of non-surgical cosmetic treatments?
Can I say to my honourable friend, first of all, can I extend my deepest sympathies to Rachel Napier, and we recognise that this growth in non-surgical treatments does increase the need for consumer protection. We're currently working with stakeholders to strengthen the regulation of cosmetics procedures, and we're committed to improving the safety of cosmetic procedures, and there are a number of ways that can be done. Better training, robust qualifications for practitioners, but also clear information so that people can make informed decisions about their care. And we'd urge anyone who's seeking a cosmetic procedure to take the time to find a reputable, safe and qualified practitioner who's subject to statutory regulation or on an accredited voluntary register. But my honourable friend has raised an important issue.
Kinnock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In May 2018, Michel Barnier said that the only frictionless model for the future relationship with the UK would be Norway Plus. Norway being part of the single market plus a customs union. This means a Norway plus Brexit would eliminate the need for the backstop and would also be agreed very rapidly, thus eliminating the need to extend Article 50. If the Prime Minister really wants to do away with the backstop and really wants to leave the EU on the 29th of March without the need for an extension, why doesn't she pivot to the Norway plus option today?
First of all, it is not the case that that is the only way to provide frictionless trade between the United Kingdom and the European Union. Other options have been put on the table. The question of the extent of that frictionless trade, it will be a matter for the second stage of negotiations.
Order. Closed question. Michael Fabricant.
Question 11.
Brilliant. I'm pleased to say to my honourable friend that thanks to our economic record, there are 90,000 more small businesses in the West Midlands since 2010. The national living wage is giving over 170,000 people a pay rise in the West Midlands this year, and employment in the West Midlands has risen by 252,000 since 2010. And I can also say to my honourable friend, we will continue to support the region by investing over £430 million as part of the Greater Birmingham and Solihull Local Enterprise Partnership.
Michael Fabricant.
As ever, that's great news for the West Midlands. And it shows our firm economic policy. But now, will my right honourable friend welcome the new Birmingham Airport Master Plan, which addresses its growth in services for businessmen and holiday makers for the West Midlands? And will she commit the government to work with the airport to help it expand its long-haul route network, which is so important for businesses of Lichfield and our holiday makers and beyond?
Well, certainly we are supporting airports beyond Heathrow, such as Birmingham, to make the best use of their existing runways. I'm happy to welcome Birmingham's decision to publish this master plan, because I understand, as my honourable friend has referred to, that it does aim to attract new long-haul routes, in addition to the routes that it already runs. But we're also committed to improving access to Birmingham Airport, and of course, for example, by 2026, the airport will be served by HS2, significantly reducing journey times to London and dramatically increasing the catchment area of the airport.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, even though Brexit is turning out to be very different from what voters were promised by the Leave campaign, are you now effectively saying to voters, in opposing a people's vote, that they had their say 3 years ago and must just put up and shut up?
I think to say to the Right Honourable Lady that what we are saying is that this House overwhelmingly voted to have the referendum in 2016 and for people to be asked their choice as to whether to leave or to stay in the European Union. I think when people voted to leave the European Union in 2016, there will have been a variety of reasons people voted that way. I think for many, they wanted an end to free movement. That's what we'll be delivering. I think for many, it was about sovereignty. That's why ending the jurisdiction of the European Court is important, and independent trade policy is part of that. That is what the government is delivering. We're delivering on the vote that took place and ensuring we do it in a way that protects jobs and gives people certainty for the future.
Rachel McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 10 years ago, I had a cervical smear test that picked up some abnormalities which, if they'd been left untreated, could have developed into something much more serious. But unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, cervical screening is at a 21-year low, and over a quarter of women don't take up this life-saving test. So will the Prime Minister please join with me? We all know it's a bit uncomfortable and it can be embarrassing for some women, but will she please urge all women up and down the country to take up this life-saving test?
Can I say to my honourable friend, I think her experience shows exactly why it is so important for women to take up this test, and we do need more to encourage women to undertake their cervical screening test. Public Health England will be launching a national campaign shortly to highlight the risks of cervical cancer and encourage women to attend their screening appointments. But I just say this because I know. I, as a Prime Minister, can stand here and say this. I know what it's like to go through a cervical smear test. It is not comfortable. Sometimes for some it will be embarrassing. Sometimes it's painful. But those few minutes can save lives. So I would encourage all women to take up their smear tests.
John Mann.
Speaker, on the Monday before Christmas, my constituent Nathan Garrett, aged 18, was referred by his GP for emergency mental health support. On the Tuesday, he was helping others, delivering my Christmas cards as he delivered many leaflets in elections over the years. And later, he asked the crisis team for emergency help, and none was forthcoming. On the Wednesday, Nathan went missing. And on the Thursday, I learnt at the volunteers event that we have every Christmas, and I was expecting to see him, that it all got too much for him and he'd taken his life. Nathan Garrett was a brilliant, engaging, kind young man. He was a county athletic champion. He was a talented, brilliant musician. He was incredibly popular. His parents and his grandmother are here today. Would the Prime Minister agree with me that when a teenager needs emergency mental health support, that support should be available within 24 hours? And would she ask her appropriate minister to meet with me and Nathan's family in order that we can push that forward today?
First of all, can I say to the honourable gentleman that I'm sure that all members of the House will join me in sending our deepest condolences to Nathan's family and friends and all those who knew him. It sounds from what the honourable gentleman said that he was an incredible young man. Every life lost is a tragedy. The incidents that we see of suicide are deeply concerning. that's why we're taking action in relation to suicide prevention. The Honourable Gentleman has also raised the issue of mental health provision, and we recognise the importance of increasing the provision for people who are suffering from mental health problems, and I'm very happy to ensure that the Honourable Gentleman can meet the appropriate Minister to discuss this.
Lucy Allen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Almost a year ago, the authorities in Telford agreed to commission an inquiry into child sexual exploitation in our town. This came after a lengthy campaign by victims and their families seeking justice and answers. The promised inquiry has not happened. There is no chairperson, there is no start date, it hasn't happened. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the failure to hold the promised inquiry lets down victims, survivors and our community? And will she join with me in urging the Telford authorities not to sweep this under the carpet, but to deliver on their promises and to start this inquiry now?
Yes. Well, can I say to my honourable friend that she's raised a very important issue, and these crimes were utterly appalling. That's why we have given highest priority to tackling child sexual abuse and exploitation, and it is very concerning that, as my honourable friend has said, that this inquiry has taken so long to start, having been announced, as she said, in the spring of last year. It's in the interests of victims and survivors that the inquiry is set up and running as soon as possible. That's what people deserve, to be able to see that inquiry taking place, and I will ensure that a Minister from the Home Office meets with my honourable friend to discuss this further.
Stuart Hosey.
Last October at PMQs, I asked the Prime Minister about my constituent Hassan Mirza and his 10-year struggle simply to renew his passport. I wrote to the Prime Minister and received a holding response 2 months ago. Since then, his uncle has passed away and he could not attend the funeral. His wife is ill, but he cannot visit her or his children. This is unacceptable. So when will the Prime Minister finally give me a detailed answer, and when will she get a grip of the failings in the Home Office?
I say to the honourable gentleman, I can only apologise to him that he has not had a detailed answer from me before now. I'm sure he gets that, but more than that, my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is happy to meet him and discuss the case.
Jack Lepresti.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Will my right honourable friend join me in paying tribute to my constituent Bob Woodward, who sadly died on Sunday? When Bob's son Robert was diagnosed with cancer in 1976 at aged 8, he founded the charity Click, Cancer and Leukaemia in Childhood, and over the following decades he raised over £100 million in support of worthy causes, which has changed lives. He was an inspirational figure and a great and compassionate man, and recently had a train, one of the new Great Western Railway trains named after him. Will my honourable friend also join me in paying our condolences and our sympathies with his friends and family?
Well, yes, I'm certainly happy to join my honourable friend in expressing our sympathies and condolences to Bob Woodward's friends and family, but also in paying tribute to Bob. As my honourable friend has pointed out, he, after tragically losing his son to cancer, he dedicated his life to young cancer patients and their families, and was able to use his success as a property developer in providing residences where families of young cancer patients could live while their child was receiving treatment. I think it's a fitting legacy that there are now 10 of these properties in the UK, and Click is now a global organisation raising funds for care of families around the world. Bob Woodward suffered a terrible tragedy with the loss of his son, but he ensured that his work through his life is benefiting others.
Ms McInnes.
Speaker. This morning I received a letter from Santander saying that they're closing the branch in Middleton and suggesting that my constituents should avail themselves of banking services at Middleton Post Office, which in its turn is being franchised into the back of W.H. Smith's. So can the Prime Minister say what her policy is for our high streets other than just managed decline?
I say to the obviously individual banks take commercial decisions. It sounds as if there will be still post office services available in the high street that the honourable lady has referred to, but we are concerned about the helping to manage our high streets and ensuring that we do have those good high streets for the future. That's why in the budget the Chancellor announced funding which is available to local authorities to work on them for plans for their high streets.
James Gray.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Will the Prime Minister join me in reassuring the people of North Wiltshire and indeed the nation that despite their announcement yesterday that they're to move their corporate headquarters and 2 senior executives to Singapore, the commitment of Dyson to Britain remains undiminished, as is evidenced?
his constituents.
As is evidenced by the £200 million he's investing in his research and development site at Lavington, and a £40 million investing in the Engineering and Design College at Malmesbury. He's totally and utterly committed to Great Britain, and this announcement yesterday has no effect at all on that commitment.
Well, can I say to my honourable friend that Dyson are clear that they will continue to have a long-term future in the UK. They've trebled their workforce to 4,800 over the last 5 years. But of course, what matters to companies like Dyson is having a government that is unapologetically pro-business, which this government is, and a government is ensuring that our balanced economic policy sees increasing employment, exports and foreign direct investment in UK companies at record highs.
Tim Farron.
Speaker, may I wish you, the Prime Minister and everybody here a very happy Cumbria Day. There is a vast array of produce available. Beer from Kirby Lonsdale, relish from Hawkshead, delish pies, tea and coffee from Pennington's. All the stuff she might need for a packed lunch if she's considering a walking holiday anytime soon. Could I remind her, of course, that Cumbria contains, after London, Britain's biggest tourist destination, but today Cumbria has come to London. Can I invite her and indeed everybody else here to come and join us in the Jubilee Room straight after PMQ to sample the best of Cumbria?
There's a sort of one-man tourist board. We're grateful to him. The Prime Minister.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that he has done a good job in promoting the benefits of Cumbria, which I'm sure will be joined by my honourable friends and others across this House. I thank him for listing the very many items I might want to put in my packed lunch when I go on a walking holiday. But I'm afraid I'm bound to say to the right honourable gentleman that while I recognise that Cumbria has good produce, Berkshire has good produce too.
Order. Thank you. Order. Urgent question. Yasmin Qureshi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Justice if he'll make a statement on the failure of the central IT system.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful for the opportunity to update the House on the IT issues facing the Ministry of Justice over recent days. Can I start by apologising to those who've been affected by the intermittent disruption, which was caused by an infrastructure failure in our supplier's data centre. While services have continued to operate and court hearings have continued, we know how frustrating this is for everyone. The issue has been that some of our staff in courts and tribunals, the Legal Aid Agency, Probation and Ministry of Justice headquarters have been unable to log on to their computers. But we have contingency plans in place to make sure that trials can go ahead as planned. The prison service has not been impacted, and to clarify incorrect reporting, criminals have not gone free as a result. We have been working very closely with our suppliers, Atos and Microsoft, to get our systems working again, and yesterday had restored services to 180 court sites, including the largest sites. Today, 90% of staff have working computer systems. Work continues to restore services, and we expect the remainder of court sites to be fully operational by the time they open tomorrow morning. We are very disappointed that our suppliers haven't yet been able to resolve the network problems in full. This afternoon, the Permanent Secretary, Sir Richard Heaton, will be meeting with the Chief Executive of Atos and will be writing personally to all members of the judiciary. I'm very grateful to all our staff who have been working tirelessly and around the clock to resolve these issues alongside our suppliers.
Yasmin Qureshi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting this urgent question, and I thank the Minister for her reply. Members will be concerned by the failure of the multiple vital IT systems required by our courts, including systems supplied by Atos and Microsoft. Indeed, I saw these failures firsthand last week when I visited one of the Crown Courts. The chair of the Criminal Bar Association described our court system as being on its knees. Following these failures, blaming savage cuts to the MOJ budget, and reports in the Times suggested there is a risk of defendants being released before trial. So can the Minister confirm whether any defendants have been released without trial? What cost has this failure incurred? Have Atos and Microsoft paid any penalties for failures on these contracts so far? Can the Minister guarantee that all the costs arising from this failure will be recovered from the suppliers? Of course, Mr. Speaker, these failures don't happen in vacuum. The Ministry of Justice has faced cuts of 40% in the decade to 2020, and the government is pursuing a £1.2 billion court reform programme, which has seen hundreds of courts close, thousands of court staff cut, and a rush to digitise many court processes. Can I ask the Minister if the plans to cut 5,000 further court staff by 2023 still being pursued? And can the Minister also perhaps explain why they ignored the Association of District Judges, who called for the court closures to be stopped until, and I quote, fully functioning IT systems are demonstrated to be up and running successfully? And finally, will the Minister now commit to a moratorium on further cuts, closures and digitisation of our courts until a bill has been brought to this House to fully scrutinise the government's plans on this?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to answer the points that the Honourable Member for Bolton South East raises. She suggests that these issues are related to cuts. This issue is not related to cuts. This issue is related to a contractual supplier, an issue in their system. She suggested that the defendants were being released, and I hope she heard in my starting statement to the House that was incorrect reporting. No prisoners have been released. In fact, the prison system is a different system to that of the MOJ, and no prisoners have been released as a result of this issue. She asks about penalty clauses. As I mentioned, the Permanent Secretary is meeting with the Chief Executive of the supplier today, this afternoon, and of course we will be looking very carefully at the contracts which include penalty clauses. She suggests, Mr. Speaker, that this is related to our rush to digitalisation. Mr. Speaker, I would like to clarify that it is because HMCTS operates on a legacy system which needs to be updated because issues will arise in it, that we are significantly investing in our digitalisation programme to ensure that our court system runs well in the future. She talks about cuts. I started with that and I will end with it, as she did, Mr. Speaker, because we are not cutting our justice system in our court service. In fact, as she rightly identified, we are putting £1 billion into it.
Bob Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad to have the Minister's reassurance that this has nothing to do with the common platform, as that is indeed the case. Will she accept that from my conversations with senior members of the judiciary, they are most anxious that the rollout of the common platform proceeds, because it's the failures of the old system that are the difficulty. But will she ensure that the new initiatives that we are bringing in, for example with digital portals, are fully and robustly tested before they come into place so that court users can have full confidence in them?
Mr. Speaker, the Chairman of the Select Committee, as always, makes very important points, and I'm very pleased to clarify that the Common Platform is not affected. The Common Platform is being trialled. In fact, the reform programme in totality is not affected by these issues. Our divorce and probate applications are not affected. And the point of reform, as I said, is to ensure that these systems work in the future. The Honourable Member referred to ensuring that our systems work, and we will be carrying out a rigorous evaluation process of our court reform programme.
Ellie Reeves.
Mr. Speaker,
prisons being issued urgent notifications, private probation services needing bailouts, trials collapsing due to disclosure failures, MOJ staff on strike over failure to be paid the London living wage, and now the court system in disarray. When will the Minister finally understand that the 40% real terms cuts to the MOJ budget since 2010 has consequences and that austerity has left the justice system at breaking point?
Mr. Speaker, as I identified when I started this afternoon, I highlighted that the issue has been caused by an infrastructure failure in our supplier's data centre. This is not, Mr. Speaker, as a result of cuts. My department received some funding in relation to the building of a prison in the recent budget. It also received investment into its court service, into its estates. We are investing £1 billion in relation to our courts service.
Victoria Prentice.
Mr. Speaker, I should declare at this point that my husband as a judge has been affected by these outages, and I am lobbied heavily on this matter at home. I would be grateful if, in the light of that, the Minister could confirm to me that I understand 75% of court staff are now back on